Hey everybody, it's Becky Scarcello of The Debrief. Seth and I are taking the week off, but we don't want to leave you empty-handed. Did you know we have a mobile app available? Inside the mobile app, we put all kinds of bonus episodes. And just for this 1 week only, we're going to give you a taste of what those bonus episodes are like. So take a listen. And if you love it, go download the app.
Check. 1, 2, 3.
The Debrief. This is the Debrief.
Your guide to Detroit.
Your guide to Detroit's arts
and entertainment scene.
This is the Debrief.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm Seth Resler, and I am here with Mark Ridley, the owner of Mark Ridley's Comedy Castle. We are sitting in the little office in the back of the comedy club. Thank you so much for sitting down and taking the time.
My pleasure, Seth. Good to have you here. And a little office. This is actually the nerve center. This is where all the magic happens here at the Comedy Castle.
Well, there's a lot of stuff in here. I mean, you've got an Emmy in here. So tell me a little bit about what that's for.
I was involved in a couple of television productions, one in 1990 and one in 1991. And the one the Emmy was for was called Funny Side of the Street, which I was a co-producer and host of. And it was Tim Allen's last local appearance before he went on to do Full House. So it was a combination of stand-up comedy, some music. It was like an old-fashioned variety show, basically, that ran here locally on Channel 2.
And tell me about the chairs over in the corner, because I think they have some significance as well.
Those chairs over there are from the old Tiger Stadium. As you look around the office here, you can see I'm a bit of a sports fanatic between golf and football and baseball. And when those went on sale, my brother bought a pair, my sister bought a pair, and I bought a pair. So we each have a pair. And then what I do when I'm here is if the baseball game's on, my father's been gone for several years now, I'll sit down. Usually if it's opening day, I'll sit down and have a beer, 2 beers, one on the desk, and one for him and one for me.
Well, I know you are celebrating a big anniversary this year. It's been 40 years for you in the comedy business. Congratulations. Tell me how it all started. Where was the first Mark Ridley's Comedy Castle?
The very first one was out at a restaurant called The Meeting Place. I used to work as a waiter there. And I knew the owner, Bruce Cameron, real well, and so I went to Mr. Cameron and I said, you know, I have this idea that I brought back from Los Angeles. When I was out there, I would be going to the Comedy Store and the Improv every night, and I got to see Robin Williams, Richard Pryor I saw working out in the main room. I saw David Letterman, who was brand new to Los Angeles, doing stand-up. And I told Mr. Cameron about it, and he wanted to do it at the Midtown Cafe in downtown Birmingham. And in the 11th hour, the city of Birmingham said, no, you can't do a stand-up comedy there because it's a cabaret license, which means if comedy doesn't work out, then you can have strippers come in, which was the farthest thing from mine and Mr. Cameron's mind. So he said, let's move it out to the Meeting Place. The basement's empty there. It's 90 seats. You know, I was going to lose maybe 35 seats by moving from Midtown to Meeting Place. And we opened January 4th, 1979, with 9 local comedians. I was the MC. I rented sound equipment for $25 a week. So that's what it cost me to really open the operation. And right from the get-go, it was a big hit.
You are credited with creating what we often think of now when we think of comedy shows, which is the 3 acts, the 3 comedians. You've got a headliner, you've got a feature, and you've got an MC. Was that something you started with? Did it evolve over time? How did that come about?
Well, like I said, I opened in January of 79. In February, I brought in Mike Binder as my very first headliner, who was from the Detroit area originally. Now he's a big-time director, writer. And I knew that up until then, I would have 9 comedians, same 9 comedians on every night that we were open. And I said, this doesn't make sense to have all these comedians on and then bring out your headliner. So I was the MC. So I got up and MC'd. I picked one act to be the middle act, and then Mike was the headliner. And it was an hour-and-a-half show, and he was getting paid. So I needed to turn the room and bring in another 90 people. So I just kept that format, and it just evolved and worked out that way. It's become the standard of the industry.
You mentioned Tim Allen. He's one of the big names that has come through this club over the years. Tell us about the early days of Tim Allen's career.
Well, his very first night, we chat about it from time to time. And in fact, he tells the story when he's on national television. He came right from work. He was working at the Sportsman in downtown Birmingham selling clothes. So he was still dressed in his sport jacket, shirt and tie. And that was a look that he maintained throughout his whole career. He was always very professional about going on stage, and he did very well. Nothing, he didn't bring the house down. He was not very busy. Dave Coulier, who played Uncle Joey on Full House, was actually the hot young Turk in the business because he'd been doing stand-up throughout high school, so he was more seasoned. And here he was at 18 years old working my club. But Tim did very, very well, and the story goes that he went over to the far end of the room and pried up a little tile, one of the floor tiles, and wrote down his first appearance ever on stage doing stand-up. And to this day, he still has that tile in his office. And if you fast forward like a couple of years, well, actually what we did, we went out and used to go a lot and have coffee across the street at the restaurant. He, it was a group of guys, and he said, I got to tell you guys something. My real name is not Tim Allen, it's Tim Dick. And we said, okay, fine. He goes, oh, and I'm going to prison. So that was the night that I found out that he was going to go away to prison for a couple of years. Well, he didn't actually know how long he was going to go away, but he was gone for about 2.5 years. And when he went away, we had a big party, I remember, and then he used to call me collect once a month just to see how things were going in the Detroit comedy scene. And the act, the whole thing, Men Are Pigs, kind of evolved at a show that he did in Akron, a corporate show, and nobody was really paying attention to him. And he goes, look at you guys, you're just all pigs. Men are all pigs, sitting there cutting your steaks, grunting, and then it just took off. The guys just loved it, so he knew he was onto something.
You mentioned Dave Coulier as well. I've heard him say that you're the reason he went out to L.A. Tell me a little bit about the early days of Dave's career.
At that time, when I opened the meeting place, there was also another club called the Delta Lady over in Ferndale. And so a lot of the guys were shuffling back and forth, trying to get 2 sets in. In New York, you can go and do 10 sets in one night if you want. But here that comedy scene was so new. And Dave, I think, was probably 19 years old. And I pulled him aside and I said, Dave, I don't know why you're not in Los Angeles. I think it's time to go. And he said, oh, I thought I was in trouble. And I said, no, you're so great. You can see it, extremely talented because he was doing voices on stage. His timing was great. So he made arrangements, and we actually went out together. I used to stay with my ex-sister-in-law in Redondo Beach, and he lined up, I think his first month or two he was there, he stayed at a dormitory at UCLA campus until he found an apartment. And he did so well that within his first year, he was signed to be the co-star of a show that was coming out, which co-starred Tom Hanks, and then eventually they replaced Dave with Peter Scolari, Bosom Buddies. But Dave was on the docket to become the co-star of Bosom Buddies, and they decided he looked too young, and they replaced him with Peter Scolari.
Now, let's talk about today. I have heard that you videotape everything that's happening on stage and watch all of the comedians. Is that true?
Yeah, I have proprietary software, closed circuit, that and I assure the comedians it's not for rebroadcast on YouTube or anything. I'm not out to monetize it. But it's my opportunity where I'm at, if I'm in Florida or I'm on the other side of the state at our home, I'll watch the shows from the night before. Sometimes very early in the morning when I'm having coffee, I'll watch it. Or, if a comedian comes in and does 5 shows, I'll usually watch at least 2 of their sets, 2 of those shows. Because if you say, oh, everything went great, and then you find out that that wasn't the case, or everything went bad and that wasn't the case, at least I can watch 2 of the 5 shows and know for sure. But open mic is still very, very important to me, so I watch those every week.
And what are you looking for when you watch the open mic?
The next Dave Coulier, the next Tim Allen, the next Brad Wenzel, Dave Landau. I mean, there's a lot of really, really strong comedians coming up through the circuit here in Detroit. And a lot of them are taking it upon themselves to start one-nighters in and around the Detroit area, which I think is wonderful. It's just building more gyms and building their comedic muscles.
We just had Dave Landau on the show, and he is really funny. I've actually spent the last 2 years for Valentine's Day in this club watching Dave Landau. He's not coming back this year because Valentine's Day is on a Thursday, so it didn't work out. But I want to ask you about another night that happens here. You have Mike Bonner in once a month. Tell me what that night is all about. Well,
Mike came to me a few years ago. I used to manage Mike, co-manage with my ex-brother-in-law, and we took him to Aspen to the comedy festival, and APA loved him, and we tried to get him to write a TV show, and it was just, he didn't have an idea. So, it's just management's hard, but Mike has a lot of ideas, and he came back to me and said, well, let's do chocolate Sundays. They do that out in Los Angeles. I said, what's chocolate Sundays? Sunday night, it's an all African-American show. I said, okay, let's try that. We tried it. The first one went very well. Then after that, kind of went downhill. And then he came to me again about 4 years ago and said, here's another idea. I said, okay. He said, let's do something called Uptown Friday Night. It's going to be different than Def Jam or anything like that. So we'll try and get more upscale acts and, the crowds coming in. And it's been good some months and a little slow other months, but for the most part, it's been very successful.
So I've actually gotten up on stage and performed here. I took the class, both classes. I took the class with Bill Bouchard and the class with Joel Fragomeni. Tell me a little bit about the classes that happen here.
The classes they're not geared to make you funny. Nobody can make you funny. You either have it or you don't. What Bill and Joel both try to do is take what you write and try and get into that mode where you're a comedian, and actually take the whole comedy scene and maybe become something else, whether it's a producer, a writer. There's a lot of aspects to stand-up comedy that people don't know. I mean, I can tell you of many, many stand-up comics who are now producers and writers and showrunners and things like that out in Los Angeles or New York. So their goal is to get you to learn how to be a professional comedian on stage, how to condense your material, how to focus, how to find your voice, how to get yourself booked, and look for the other openings that are in stand-up comedy. In fact, Bill and I have been talking. He wants to start a comedy writing class now, because there are a lot of people out there that don't have the nerve to get up on stage, but they like to write. So this is another opportunity for young writers to come along and see if they can become comedy writers.
You mentioned Brad Wenzel. He is from the area. He's done Conan a number of times now and just put out an album on Third Man Records last year. He moved out to L.A., and I know that Jeff Horst, who was on Kevin Hart's Heart of the City, just moved out to L.A. Do comedians still need to move out to either New York or L.A. at some point, or can you have a career if you're based here in Michigan?
You can have a career if you're based here in Michigan, but if you want to have a big career, you better be in New York or L.A. And in fact, a lot of comedians, I will tell them to move to Chicago if they don't feel like moving to New York or L.A., because Chicago has a great comedy scene. In fact, my son used to do stand-up, and part of his graduating class that all moved to L.A. was T.J. Miller, Kamal Najani, who wrote and starred in The Big Sick, Kyle Kinane, Pete Holmes, Matt Browner, all named comedians now, and they really kind of honed their craft in Chicago, and then they all moved out to Los Angeles. But you can move to New York. The thing that I've heard about New York is that you can spend a lot of time there because it's very tight. It's a very tight comedy circle. There's maybe 14 clubs in Manhattan alone, and if you're not part of that scene, it's going to take you a while to break into it. If you move to Los Angeles, you have to go to the Comedy Store or the Laugh Factory and just stand in line and wait to see if you're going to be on that night. I think Chicago just offers more opportunities, like Detroit, to go to a club and then introduce yourself and then start networking and meeting people, like-minded people who come from around the country.
You mentioned your son. You've got more than one. Let's talk about what they're doing, because the apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
Well, they're doing what I set out to do. I went to Los Angeles to try and get into the film industry after I got out of Wayne State. And it was not very successful for me. But, I came back with the idea about a comedy club. So it worked out for me. But then both my sons moved to Chicago a few years ago, and one went to Columbia, the School of Fine Arts here in Chicago, for about a year. And they did stand-up, and they wrote, and they met people, and then they both moved to Los Angeles. And the older one, Ryan, he started doing something called Channel 101, which was you make a film, and then you show it at a little theater once a month, and that's where he met Dan Harmon, who became the creator of Community, and then, of course, Rick and Morty. So Ryan became a writer and executive producer on Rick and Morty, won an Emmy for that, and now he's working with Robert Kirkman, and they're writing a film based on Kirkman's idea. Kirkman created the comic book, The Walking Dead, but he has several other films. And Adam worked for 3 seasons on Netflix for a production company producing and directing Last Chance U. He worked on the Foo Fighters documentary, Billy Joel documentary, traveled with Kevin Hart to Europe, filming and producing his documentary that they're doing. So they're both keeping very busy in the industry.
Let's talk about the Michigan comedy scene. I mean, you've been here for 40 years. I imagine things have changed a lot. I mean, you had the stand-up comedy boom of the 80s. Talk about what happened after that. Now you're seeing Netflix just put out a stand-up comedy special after stand-up comedy special. What is the state of stand-up comedy, both nationally and here locally?
Well, I think, and I talk to other club owners around the country, and I get calls from them, or I call them, and just to see how they're doing in their markets. And all of us kind of experienced a little downturn last year. We don't know why. Could be the state of the politics in the country. It could be, we don't know. We don't know. But since November of 2018, and I'm down in Florida during the winter, and I hang out a lot and play golf with Les McCurdy, owns McCurdy's Comedy Theater. We're all seeing a big uptick again. And I think it's just that people saying, hey, this is the state of the industry. And, we've all experienced it at one time or another. When there was just I tell you how many comedy specials, Comedy on the Road, Evening at the Improv, VH1 Stand-Up Spotlight. When that all came out, that kind of shook the tree and a lot of leaves fell. Because we were at our peak in the 80s. We were almost 450 clubs in the country. Now I think if there's 200, I'd be surprised. And the chain thing has kind of stopped. A lot of places had chains. I know the Improv is going to stop opening more clubs. So we've all pretty much settled in. It's like I have one club and I enjoy having one club. To try and expand an empire, that's for maybe younger people to do. But I really enjoy just having the one club.
Now, you seek sunnier shores in the winter, I know, which I don't blame you. But you're back in town for a charity event that you just did. Talk about some of the charity events that you do here at the club.
We do quite a few charity events. Mary Coyle has been my general manager. She's been with me since 1985. She started as a hostess and then a waitress and then eventually became an assistant manager and then a manager. So she books all the events, and we do probably around 20 fundraisers a year. But one of the big ones that I'm involved with that I come back for in February is the Salvation Army's Bed and Bread program. We do Comedy for a Cause. And this year was our 8th year, and we've raised over $250,000 in 8 years. And that money goes a long way to feed people, mobile soup kitchens around the city of Detroit. But we do the Animal Shelter Program, South Oakland Homeless, the Furniture Bank, infant mortality, you name it. There's quite a few there's a lot of what I call orphan charities. They're not the big names. Everybody thinks about American Cancer or diabetes and things like that. And not to minimize what they do, but we make it more affordable for people to come and have a good time. And we provide clean comedy for them. We have a lot of comedians who can do club comedy and clean comedy. So they say they want a PG-rated show. We can do a PG-rated show, and they end up raising a lot of money for their charity.
Very cool. Congratulations on 40 years. It's been amazing. That is really, really uncommon in this industry to have a club that's been around that long. So it's absolutely amazing. Here's hoping there's another 40 on the way.
How about just 10 more? We'll talk on my 50th because my wife asked me the same thing. In fact, I had Louis Anderson in as my special guest for the 40th. And we were coming from the airport, and she says, well, what do you plan on doing for your 50th? I said, we weren't even at the club yet. And I said, hopefully being alive. So, we'll work on that. Each year is a blessing.
Well, Mark Ridley, thank you very much, and congratulations.
Thanks, Seth. Good talking to you.
The D Brief.
Your guide to Detroit's arts and entertainment scene.